A thimbleful of wine for the kids, the world-famous Bordeaux vineyards, and kissing the wine. This week, it's all about wine.
Traveling the world to bring you delicious dishes, tasty beverages, and interesting experiences. This is the Destination Eat Drink Podcast on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
I'm Brent Peterson. Welcome to Destination Eat Drink, and Happy New Year! Destination Eat Drink is the place for foodies who love to travel and travelers who love to eat. And this week, we're toasting in the new year with some wine from France, Spain, and surprisingly, Missouri. But first, if you've enjoyed Destination Eat Drink, please rate and review the podcast on your podcast app. And if you really love food and travel, check out my foodie travel guide to Portugal. Inside is the best things to eat and drink and things to do in 17 Portuguese cities, including, of course, Lisbon and Porto, but lots and lots of other places. The ebook is over 600 pages long. It's only $9.99 at buymeacoffee.com/destinationeatdrink/extras. Well, I thought we'd bring in 2025 with some great wine conversation, so let's drink.
Destination Eat Drink.
Darlie Newman is the award-winning creator and host of the TV show Travels with Darlie. She'll be on the show next week with a full episode about the new season of her show. But right now we're talking to Darlie about visiting the incredible wine museum in Bordeaux, France.
It's a multi-level museum. The architecture is pretty phenomenal. It was designed to look like wine swirling in a glass, the actual building. And it's this round shape so that when you're traveling through it, you're supposed to almost be traveling through a wine glass, which when you think about it it's a pretty cool architectural statement. And it
Absolutely.
it is a wine museum. So it's nice. And you can get up high within the museum to do actual wine tasting on the top level. And I don't know if you did that, Brent, but I thought it was cool.
Yes.
Yeah, they did have wines from all over the world and they changed them and they had some more rare stuff. And I specifically asked, let me try something that I wouldn't be trying every day while I'm here, because it's fun to try something kind of off the wall. And I had a Peruvian wine as one of the things that I tried when I was there, one of the types of wines. But I was led through the museum by someone that worked there, and she was sharing with me that you really are charting the history of winemaking throughout the world, not just France. When you're there, it's one of those museums that's really modern in the way that their exhibitions are very interactive, which I love. I mean,
Yes,
I
yes.
traveled to a lot of museums, and my favorite museums are the interactive ones. In Belgium, I went to a museum of sound where you can play instruments. I love City Museum in St. Louis because you can climb on things. It's all huge found objects, everything from like school buses to slides. It's crazy. And this is another museum where you're going through this history of winemaking and you're able to smell different scents. There's tactile things to touch. There's fun pop cultural references. I thought it was funny that they had an exhibit that was showing how the astronauts drank wine in space and how there was a friend's wine at one point. I never saw that, but I think I was too young to be drinking wine at that point. So whatever, maybe I just didn't know about it. But yeah, so really fun history of wine, and it makes you again appreciate wine that much more. And I think that if you're going to visit, you could visit at any point in your journey through Bordeaux, but it might be a good idea to go there at the beginning of your trip to really get that context of where you're going and the further insight into wine before you go out into the more of the countryside, into the wineries and vineyards to do your tasting. So another awesome stop, cool museum if you like going to museums, very accessible and just beautiful to look at as well as travel through. I don't know. What did you think of it?
I loved it. It's one of my favorite spots, like I said. And what I really liked about it was you mentioned all the interactive stuff. And I think one of the things that sometimes puts people off of wine is that they think it's too stuffy or too unapproachable. And what the Cité du Vin does is really brings it down to the level where you can get involved with it, whether it's doing the different smelling exhibits or learning about having those exhibits of the wines from wine regions from all over the world. And I don't know if you went into the one room that I just loved. It was kind of a reproduction of a dinner party, and they had holograms of people all around the table, and you could walk from person to person and kind of eavesdrop in on their conversation about wine or politics or whatever. It was fascinating, but it was also fun and educational at the same time. And that's what really brought it home for me as a great place to visit.
Fantastic in the way that they did it, and so modern and so interesting. And again, I like those museums that are updated. And some museums I'm going into now, I'm like, oh my gosh, they have to do an update, or they've got to get some of these more interactive exhibitions because that's what people are looking for now. And it makes it really fun for all ages as well, that you can really make it an experiential visit.
Like you said, Darley, I think this would be good advice to go to this museum first to kind of get grounded on, wine around the world, but specifically wine from Bordeaux before you go out and visit some of the chateaus and some of the vineyards and whatnot. And you did this. You went to Saint-Emilion, which is where some of the most famous vineyards are that produce Bordeaux wine. Talk about going to Saint-Emilion and visiting the wineries and drinking good wine.
Well, there's so many different wineries and vineyards you can visit if you're in Saint-Emilion. They were telling me at this Beau Séjour Bicot, and I'm not pronouncing that totally right, but it was a really historic winery that I was able to visit. And they have this, it's a first classified growth type wine. And it's all about, there's all these classifications of wine when you're traveling in Bordeaux. And they're, some of them are getting these like specialized seals or symbols. The soil in Saint-Emilion is known to be so great because it's this limestone clay soil. And that particular winery is just outside of Saint-Emilion. I mean, you could walk from the winery into Saint-Emilion. And again, a wonderful wine. I actually have some waiting for me right now in New Jersey because we all went in together, my crew and I, and we bought a case together. Like we split it up and shipped it to my photographer's house. So it has now arrived.
Oh, perfect.
I know Greg was talking to me yesterday and he said he'll be in the city this week so I can get my wine. And I thought, oh, I need it because the holidays are coming. Like I need that amazing French wine. But this particular winery is another wonderful family owned place. And Saint-Emilion is interesting because there's a whole history with Emilion the monk who was hiding out there, living in a grotto, kind of a hermit, but performing these miracles. And he became known in the area and was a draw for people to come and visit Saint-Emilion. And the village or town itself is just another wonderful, beautiful place to go with multiple levels within the city of places to walk around and explore medieval architecture and stop and have a glass of some type of wine at a cafe. But the history there was really interesting. And they had these classic vintages. The wine was silky and smooth. And I love when you're tasting wine in Bordeaux, because if you talk to some of the different winemakers and the sommeliers, if they're describing the wine, I always ask them to describe the wine. They'll ask me and I'll give my little description, but then I love to hear what they have to say, because when they start to describe the wines for you and how the grapes have been aged and what they're tasting, because everyone tastes something different, it's almost like poetry. and some of the descriptions, I was surprised. I mean, some of the ways they're describing the wine, I was like, wow, this is like not what I would think about when I thought about wine. And that's why Cité du Vin is so interesting as well, because they're taking you through this history of winemaking, but also when you're able to smell some of the different things that you could smell within a wine, I was surprised at things I hadn't thought about. But then when I did smell them, like an old leather book or an old leather shoe, even, which doesn't sound appealing, but you smell those things, and then you go and taste the wine, and you say, oh, now I see, now I see that within the wine. So it really does expand your mind if you're into wine and wine tasting to travel through this area. But this winery was another one that had this wonderful, wonderful wine and was really a great story as well.
I think maybe we should take this juncture to point out that we're talking about, really some of the best wine in the world. And people might think, well, it's completely out of my range. It's out of my budget. I'll never be able to afford that. And yes, there are bottles that will cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars. But that said, when you're in Bordeaux, you can, because people are living on everyday budgets and they drink wine with, like you said, for breakfast sometimes. There are affordable ways to drink really, really good wine when you're in Bordeaux. Just ask folks, what's a good everyday wine here from Bordeaux? What do you recommend? What's on the menu that you like to drink every day? And you can stay within your budget.
Oh, no, for sure. There were really inexpensive wines in different places, and it's very regionalized and very specific to the location. Usually in every location that you're traveling, there's a wine from that specific area. I was in this old fort city and trying a wine from like right there in the area. So you can get hyper local with it, and you don't have to spend a lot. If you've been to Italy, it's like Italy in that way, where you can get really inexpensive. They say the wine is less expensive than buying a bottle of water. So you might as well opt for the wine.
Pilar Rubio is a foodie travel guide from Seville. She takes hungry and thirsty visitors around her famous city, and she is a lover of sherry. She tells me all about the famous fortified Spanish wine.
Okay, you stop me, Brent, because you know that this is one of my favorite things in the world, sherry wine. I'm a serious sherry lover. So you stop me.
Okay.
I could be talking about sherry all morning.
Feel free. The floor is yours.
So sherry is produced very close to Sevilla. This last year, they made bigger the geographical area of production of sherry, and it's part of the Sevilla province, but it's mostly in the Cádiz province, in Jerez, around Jerez and the Atlantic Ocean. So you cannot find a European wine made more in the south. And it's a very special wine. Some people think that sherry is a liqueur. It's not. It's always a wine, but it's very special. It's very different because it's a fortified wine. They add grape spirit to the wine, and they age the wine in big cask. If you visit a winery in Jerez, that I totally suggest you to do, because it's a totally different way of making wine. You are going to see these amazing big buildings. We call them the cathedrals of wine, with this big cask in rows. There is a row in the floor, and above that there is another one, and above that there is another one. There can be 3 or 4 or 5, and the casks are so big. You can put 600 liters in each one of them. And they are mixing old wine with new wine. The newest is at the top, the oldest at the bottom, in the solera. It's called solera, this row of cask, because it's close to the floor, and the floor in Spanish is suelo. So from suelo, solera. That is the oldest. The only bottle from the oldest, that never take more than 25 of the wine there. Because that wine that they take to bottle, and they bottle when it's ready to drink, they don't age in bottles, that is refreshed, is refilled from the row above, that is younger, and that is refilled from the row above. So they are always blending. By law, the youngest sherry in a bottle should be 2 years old, but normally it's older, and part of it, you never know how old it is, really. Maybe it's 50 years old, or 100 years old,
Mm-hmm.
a part of it. It's a fascinating way of making wine. All the sherry wines are white, all of them, even those that are mahogany color. And what we normally drink here is dry sherry. People think about sherry abroad and they think about sweet, sometimes bad quality syrupy wine,
Yes, yes.
cooking, Christmas, Granny's cabinet. And here it has nothing to do with that. Sherry starts in the driest wine in the world and it finishes probably in the sweetest wine in the world. And in between, there's a lot of different sherries. We, the sherry lovers, we are like a sect. We are like a cult. We want more people to join us. We always say that there is no one who doesn't like sherry. It's just that you haven't found your sherry. You need to try more. It's the most gastronomical wine in the world. I love wine in general, but sherry for me, it has a complexity, a variety, an intensity that I cannot find in other wines. It's the most gastronomical wine. There is always a sherry for every single food, even for those that traditionally are considered like that you cannot pair with any wine. There is a sherry for that. I'm thinking about artichokes or asparagus or spicy food, egg, vinegary food. There's always a sherry for this. It can be a fino or a manzanilla that is the driest. This is great with seafood, with pickles, with fish, with sushi. Or it can be an amontillado. Amontillado is probably the most versatile of all the sherries. But it's absolutely worth it to explore. Maybe the first sip is going to taste weird for some people, especially the dry, but it only goes better, especially with food. It makes food better, and the food makes the wine better. It's a whole universe. Once you start, you want to know more, you want to taste more, and you realize that you know nothing. It's a fascinating universe. Right?
I think my favorite kind is the Fino because I think that's one of the drier ones, and I love sipping on the Fino. It's also to me, it's one of the lighter sherries. Sometimes they're a little too alcoholic for me. And your
Yeah.
point that you need to have food with it is a good one. It's like you're not sitting there quaffing sherry. You're sipping sherry. But for me, Fino is the best. Describe what makes what the characteristic is of Fino compared to maybe another one of the different varietals of sherry.
Fino and Manzanilla are the most popular sherries here, and you're going to see a lot of local people with this characteristic glass, always holding the glass from the bottom and sipping with tapas. It's very, very dry. It's the driest. It's pale color, and it keeps this pale color because it's always aging in the cask underneath a yeast layer that we call the veil of the flower, veil of the flor. And this yeast is going to eat all the sugar that could be in the wine. And it's very crisp and very elegant, a little bit bitter sometimes. And it's 15% alcohol. It's the lightest of sherry, and it's 15% alcohol. That is the minimum. The rest of the sherries are going to be 17 or even higher in alcohol. So we sip it very, very slowly. Also because it's very complex and sherries are long, so you don't need to be drinking all the time. And also it's alcoholic, so we sip it. We kiss the wine. We tend to be a little bit poets with wine and sherry.
I
But
love that.
it's a must. You need to try. You need to try Fino or Manzanilla. Fino is very easy to find abroad. There is a winery, Tío Pepe González Dias, and they have a wonderful marketing net, and it's very easy to find Tío Pepe Fino everywhere in the world, really.
Kat Neville is the host and creator of the award-winning TV show Tastemakers on PBS. She tells me about the surprising winemaking tradition in Missouri. Let's jump to wine, one of my favorite subjects. you you did an episode that focused on wines in Missouri. Specifically, went to Dale Hollow Winery, and of course, when I flipped the episode on, my first reaction was Missouri wines. I had no idea. Is this a typical reaction that you get from outsiders who are ignorant about this?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, even people who live in Missouri aren't that aware of Missouri wine. But we have been making wine in Missouri since the early 1800s. Missouri is a really fascinating crossroads state, right in the middle of the United States. And St. Louis, for example, is at the confluence of the two major rivers on this continent, the Mississippi and the Missouri. And so people came in, they came to St. Louis as kind of a jumping off point to other points west. And a lot of the Germans who came in, they went down the Missouri River, and the beautiful rolling topography along the Missouri River reminded them greatly of the Rhine Valley. And so a lot of them chose to settle. And so that Missouri has had a commercial winemaking industry since the early 1830s. And it's a long story that involves international intrigue with the phylloxera bug and all of this kind of stuff. But today we have about 130 wineries that are operating in the state of Missouri, and more vineyards besides. But Dale Hollow is such an interesting story, because it is a young family in a town called Stover, Missouri. It's not part of any of our like traditional winemaking regions. And they just on a whim decided in their grandfather's land, where their grandfather used to grow corn and all that kind of stuff, normal farming stuff. They decided on a whim to plant like 1,000 vines. And that was 10 years ago. And in kind of the annual cultivation of the grapes, and each year trying to make wines and kind of learning step by step, because really winemakers only have one chance every year to make wine. They have created this wonderful community gathering place where the wine is delicious. But it's more than that. It really has become a spot for the community to be proud of, and to come together and to know each other. And what Katie Dale is really inspiring to me, because she traveled to Europe and she was learning about wine specifically in Italy. And it clicked for her that in Europe, where they've been making wine for thousands of years, wine is regional and it's local, and it's not, something where, I can't remember exactly what the example was, but she's like, when you're in XYZ region, you don't drink Chianti, you drink Valpolicella. And so she was like, and so it made sense to me that, in my small winery in Missouri, in the Ozarks, I need to be making regional Ozark wines and teaching people about what that means. And to me, again, kind of in the way that the story of Dr. Pearson is, it's one story in one place, but it's larger. I mean, there are amazing wines that are made in New York and Virginia, Colorado, New Mexico. There are beautiful wine regions across the United States, and there is a really gathering interest in regional American wines. And I mean, obviously wines from Napa and Sonoma and Walla Walla, like all these like beautiful wine regions are amazing, but there's so much more to explore in American wine. And so again, it's like, that's what I think is so fascinating about this story. Yes, Katie and Jesse Dale are an extremely cute, I hate to, that doesn't sound like the right word, but they like Jesse, when he's being interviewed, he just keeps giggling, because he's kind of like, I can't believe I get to do this. It worked. We have this winery. And it's just wonderful to just see the joy that they have in creating this place together and with their family. But again, it's a larger story, because American wine, a lot of winemakers are choosing to play around with grapes that you're just not familiar with, not the Cabernets and Chardonnays of the world, but they're playing with these hybrids that do well in not Mediterranean style dry climates like you find in California, etc. They're growing things like Chambourcin and Norton and Vignoles and Seyval Blanc, and these are grapes that most people have never heard of, but they make really delicious wines. And so I love wine, you love wine, and to me, it's exciting to be able to explore wines that are unusual and very regional. So that's what I'm hoping people take away from this particular episode.
That episode resonated with me because you talk about the Germans who came to Missouri. My great-grandfather was one of those German immigrants. He didn't land in Missouri. He kept going. He landed in Nebraska, where there's a big German population. But my father used to remember going to his grandfather's house, my great-grandfather, the German immigrant, who had some vines in the backyard and would make wine in the German style. And he would give the grandkids a little, he described it as a thimbleful of wine when they had dinner. So this episode was really very personal to me too for that reason.
I mean, I've been in food media for over 20 years. I've been doing this for a long time. And there are always big stories, like stories of big wineries or, really like famous chefs and that kind of stuff. And that's great. Those stories are out there and they're already being told. What I'm really drawn to are stories of exactly what you're talking about. They make you remember about, your grandfather used to give these little thimblefuls. I feel like those are the stories that very often get left on the table. And those are the stories that I think are the most interesting because they teach us about what's possible for ourselves, and they teach us about our history and our common culture. And I don't know, to me, that's the kind of stuff that I really like to seek out and share with people because they're the stories that don't get told very much.
Okay, that's Kat Neville. You can find out more about her work at watchtastemakers.com. Darlie Newman's website is darlie-newman.com, and Pilar is on Instagram. I've got a link to her in the show notes along with all my other guests from this week. Well, that's it for this week's show. And like I said, Darlie Newman will be back next week for a brand new episode about the new season 12 of Travels with Darlie. So you don't want to miss that. There's also a ton of new stuff at destinationeatdrink.com. I just posted a foodie travel guide to the undiscovered city of Ericeira. You can read a snippet of that for free at destinationeatdrink.com and look under the Portugal tab, or you can buy the ebook for just $2.99. What a deal. You can get that at buymeacoffee.com/destinationeatdrink/extras. There's also a brand new video out if you're interested in how we chose our city of Setúbal when we moved to Portugal. I outline the rigorous decision-making process, our must-haves, and how we narrowed it down on my latest YouTube video. You can see that by clicking on the video tab at destinationeatdrink.com, or you can go to my YouTube page at youtube.com/@destinationeatdrink946. Destination Eat Drink is distributed by the Radio Misfits Podcast Network and Ed Silla. Thanks, Ed. I'm Brent Peterson. I will see you down the road.
Join us next week for another culinary adventure on Destination Eat Drink, a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.